I am just absolutely thrilled to be on a call with Dr. Roger Harrington and Alexandra Wright, who are now as actively involved in the BC 2024 election as you can possibly get. They've got lots of experiences to share. This is in no way about me. I'm not going to bore you with any details about me, but I'd like for each of you to take just about a minute or so to introduce yourselves. Let us know, what you're all about. Okay, and Alexandra, why don't you go first?
For sure, thank you. I'm Alexandra Wright, and a lot of people might know me as the former MLA candidate for the BC Conservatives in the Kelowna Mission riding. I was unceremoniously dumped about a month ago, but still very interested in what's going to be happening with this upcoming election, and here to support and talk about the issues that everybody in BC cares about.
I'm Dr. Roger Harrington, and I am the standing candidate with the independent movement. I ran a dental clinic for 43 years. Actually, I had 7 different locations in Penticton. The first 20 years of which it was a real healthcare practice. In fact, all of dentistry had a healthcare attitude, and then ultimately dentistry went on to become a business. And so what happened was many practitioners sacrificed their integrity so that they could run businesses. I continued in that last 20 years to maintain my integrity in the fashion of looking after my patients first over my own. And I slept every night, and it was fun to be able to retire. And so now I take that interest and that integrity into the political arena we're looking at.
So, as a candidate or participant in the 2024 election, what was it that made you decide to actually run as a candidate? And this time we'll go with you, Roger.
So I didn't choose initially to become a candidate. We ran through the mandates, a core group, and largely headed by you, Wayne. We were protesting on corners in 2022, and of course things came to a head in February and March with the convoy. And we reached a point where our correspondence with our elected officials was one fat zero. And so the group decided to start looking at a political avenue. And again, Wayne, under your leadership, we did a SWOT analysis, which was reviewing the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats that we might engage in such a political process. And in the end, the group that we worked with asked me to run, and we've gone forward from there.
How about you, Alexandra?
Yeah, well, I think I have a very similar story actually to Rogers. So definitely over the past 5 years, I would say I've gotten increasingly more concerned about our freedoms and our democracy in this province. A lot of us noticed that during COVID, that, following the science meant following the money and, not questioning anything. And that really disturbed me because as a lawyer, I, believe that critical analysis and being able to question everything is of utmost importance. So last year, when I heard that the BC Conservatives were recruiting and that they had a policy platform where they were going to prohibit vaccine mandates, they were going to repeal Bill 36, which is that dreadful healthcare bill, I wanted to jump on board and do something positive for this province so we could set it back going in the right direction.
So, how about we just move on, take a couple of minutes each and describe how you feel about the party system and why you would be a solution to the political problems in the province today. And again, Alexandra, we're going to go to you first.
Sure. Yeah, well, it's really funny, obviously, because as you know, up until a month ago, I would have argued with you that the party system was the way to handle this situation. I honestly thought that being part of a party that had platforms and had the good talk about where we were going to go and what we were going to vote in the next election was the answer. But as we've recently seen, it doesn't take a lot for a political party to be infiltrated and to start moving away from its original positions and values. So now I really do think that the independent candidates are going to be our saviors in this next round of elections. And as we know from the BC United non-merger with the BC Conservatives, we have a lot of excellent candidates who've basically been dropped like hot potatoes, not through any fault of their own, but now they're in a unique position where they can actually focus on their voters and their constituents. Because as we know, when you're part of a political party, unfortunately, you have to vote with that party once you get into the Legislative Assembly. And that is a huge problem for individual ridings that don't have the same interests as, you know, the larger ridings, the more important ridings out on the West Coast.
And I would reflect a lot of what Alexandra has said. In the process of moving our political agenda forward, we reviewed running our group as an independent group or running with the Conservatives. And because they already had an existing infrastructure and campaign structure, we opted to go with the Conservative Party. And we ran down that pathway. We ran all the way to the point where John Rustad came to my home and interviewed me. And in the course of that interview, it appeared that I was going to be chosen as the nominee. And I was promised about 10 days we would get a confirmation. Some 35 days later, I got a 2-line note that said, "Hey, thanks for the application, and you've been rejected." So since we had already done a review looking at the independent movement, I picked up the phone, talked with some of the people who were the hub of the independent movement, and we did an about face, and I started running as an independent. And that initially was a very freeing event. I mean, right at the beginning, I was having a bit of a pity party, and then I went, "Hey, wait a minute, Tonto. The deal now is we're totally free as independents." And as we did street surveys, which we'll discuss later on, as we did the street surveys, many of the people we talked with on the street went, "Hey, we've been waiting for you." And so here we are.
Yeah, it's quite the interesting chain of events that have happened with the infiltration that Alexandra mentioned, and you know how people's lives can just be turned upside down with with a 2-line email note saying thanks but no thanks. So
I got a phone call, Roger.
Got a phone call. Well, you are so privileged. Surprise, surprise, surprise.
So based on your campaign experience so far, what are the most pressing issues in your riding or in the area that you want to serve the citizens of the province? And again, Alexandra, we're going to just keep going to you.
Sure. Well, I obviously had the Kelowna Mission riding. Ironically enough, I don't live in the Kelowna Mission riding. I actually live in Kelowna Lake Country, which is just north of that. But I would say that those two ridings actually have very similar issues. First of all, with Kelowna, and I'm sure further south with Roger, what we're seeing is this terrible crime in our downtown businesses. The drug addiction, we've got addicts on every street corner, they call them the leaners because they're leaning right over in very, flexible poses. It's quite impressive. So obviously we need to get rid of this, safer drug supply. That was the big one for me. Obviously, affordability is a huge one. We have to get rid of some of these taxes, which is also why I was attracted to the BC Conservatives, because they had promised to get rid of that, the low carbon emissions as well as the carbon tax. So obviously affordability is another one that is huge. And then getting back to where I started, which is freedom, right? Our freedoms and rights are being chipped away very quickly, I think, at this point, with the NDP government taking away medical professionals, engineers, lawyers, all of their rights to self-govern. So that was a very important one to me too, because we do not need the government getting into everybody's business and telling them how to operate and telling them what the code of conduct is. That's a very dangerous precedent. And, I said it to Kelowna Now the other day, and Jim Check, kind of called me on it, but we are marching towards communism. I feel, the government is moving into every part of our lives, and we need to push back and say enough is enough.
I'm with you.
So we ran two separate surveys on the street in Penticton and in Summerland. And so there were 180 and 150 surveys taken. And the question we asked people were, what were the top 3 issues that they were concerned with? And they came back with the cost of living, carbon tax, and those sorts of things. As Alexandra, you've reflected that, I think, as second in your surveys. And then behind that was crime, homelessness, and addiction. And then the third thing, of course, was with healthcare. And as a healthcare professional, I saw Bill 36 coming down the pike, which is the Health Professions and Occupations Act. And of course, that has removed informed consent, and we'll probably deal with that later, but that's probably the single biggest thing that came out of that. But there's 650 articles in that provision. As far as affordability goes, by removing at least the provincial carbon tax, it's a step in the right direction, and as such, I don't understand why people think that a carbon tax is going to change anything relative to the climate. I mean, we haven't seen any decline in the temperatures. If you look in Canada, you'll see that a number of trees. Each of those trees is capable of soaking up 40 pounds of carbon on an annual basis. When you do the arithmetic, it turns out we have 10 times the capacity to soak up the carbon that we produce, which is infinitesimal compared to the global production. Why? Why are we penalizing our citizens?
Good question. So another question is why would it be important for political candidates to state what their values are, and why are those values important in the 2024 election?
Wayne, I'm going to give you a bit of a sad answer on this one, I think. I honestly think if you are listening to somebody who's part of a political party and they tell you their values, you really have to look very closely to their past actions. And Roger, you know this especially with the person that you are running against down there, because, she's running on a platform of medical freedoms. But as you and I both know, she said some pretty horrible things to people about, them daring to exercise those medical freedoms not that long ago. So in terms of that political system, I really do think you have to sit down with your candidate and ask some very pointed questions about what their thoughts were a few years ago and what they did to fight against some of the tyranny that we're facing. In terms of your individual candidates, I mean, you still have to sit down and ask them those questions, but you are also going to be able to hopefully hold them to task once they get into that legislative assembly if they are not voting in your interest. So either way, you really do have to look at actions over words, because right now everybody is saying the buzzwords so that they get elected. And unfortunately, this is the problem with our current political system.
And I agree that the individual candidates, regardless of party, should be vetted, because as just an aside, I got pulled into the party system myself too. And that was around 2015. As I thought it was the only solution to get us out of the messes that we were starting to see ourselves get into. And prior to that, I'd always looked at the person and not the party. And I've come back full circle again, where I now look at the person instead of the party. I couldn't care less what the party says. Roger, your turn.
For the record, I'm going to state my values, and they're stated in the bio that shows up on our page. So those values are integrity, courage, freedom, passion, and fun. And even in doing this, we're having a bit of fun. I see some smiles. The fact of the matter is that If you go back in the record, as you suggested, Alexandra, I think that my record will stand. I've been consistent throughout. One of the things that we've experienced on the street as we engage people has been my reputation as a dental practitioner of 43 years in this area. People come up to me and they go, "Oh yeah, you were my dentist and I really miss you." And when I retired, my practice came to me and they were tearful and they said, "This is the end of an era." And so as such, I will continue to stand on those values, and I dare the constituency to test me. I want them to talk with me and engage me, and let's do the test. And we've got 43 days before the election. So let's step on the gas and go for it.
Well, and if we're going to step on the gas, what are the most important things you see running as an independent candidate? And what kinds of issues do you face? Some of the things that I consistently hear about are vote splitting or strategic voting. That seems to be something on the public's mind. And Roger, you get to go first on this one.
So the three things that you mentioned. So vote splitting, 60% of the electorate, this is the last number I've heard, 60% of the electorate didn't show up at the polls. And that is a valuable tell, because as far as vote splitting goes, those people are thoroughly frustrated with the party system, which we all agree is in abject failure. The power in that is that if we can get our marbles in a row, or the little gumballs that you see in that video that shows up, we can pull onto this huge reservoir and draw those people in. Sure, I'd be delighted to split some of those votes out for people who ascribe to the values that we're talking about in the independent movement. Then by all means, step away from the party system. But the real power is going to be picking up those marbles that haven't been voting. So then the next thing that you step into is strategic voting. And really, that's a derivative of splitting. But the real truth of that is those people are choosing the lesser of three evils. Okay, go for it. And in doing that, what are you going to do when you vote for the lesser of the evils? Another evil. And then the last one is the obfuscation by the news media. And they are totally ignoring the independent movement, which I find really exciting, because we are this stealth movement and we're not even being acknowledged. And so, the media is being paid by the government, and the end run for us is to get out and press some flesh, shake some hands, look people in the eyeball. And I think on election day, there's going to be a big surprise when we show up and mop up.
Well, I'd certainly like to see things mopped up. Alexandra, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, it's funny, because when I started campaigning with the BC Conservatives, I got the vote splitting argument every time I told somebody I was running. And then, of course, what happened is we became the, basically polling in the majority. So to me, it's kind of a silly argument, because it's manipulated, as Roger indicates, through the mainstream media and through polling, right? Like, who's funding the polling, who's funding the projection companies, and how are they manipulating the data to get the result that they want to show the public? Because as we know, people are a lot like 5-year-olds playing soccer, right? They're all running towards the ball, and nobody is, independently figuring out where to block and, defend. So to me, again, it's all manipulation by the media. And to Roger's point, the lesser of the evils is still evil. And when we are voting out of fear, we're making terrible decisions. We should be voting with our hearts and voting for the person that we truly believe is going to represent us. And yeah, when 60% of people are not voting, it's just a crazy situation where, so many people are apathetic. So many people are disgusted by our leaders, and they don't think that there's a better choice. And so, especially now with this whole BCU kerfuffle at the last minute, I'm curious to see how that plays out, because the people who were going to vote BC United, the was they were all going to flock over to the BC Conservatives if their party folded. But is that a correct assumption? Are they going to be so disgusted by the whole manipulation that they're just going to stay home and not vote at all? Are they going to make a protest vote and vote for an independent or a green, or God forbid the NDP? Like, we don't know. So there's a lot of unknowns, I think, to that. So yeah, to circle back, we get this argument every time there's somebody who's offering a different choice, who's coming out of nowhere. And it's, to me, it's just an argument based on fear, and an argument based on, hey, I know I don't deserve your vote, but I still want your vote because you have to.
Yeah, moving on a little bit. In my 35 years that I worked for government, I was trained to look at the root cause of problems before I tried to put forward any solutions at all. And in doing that, I want to ask both of you, what do you believe to be the root causes of the problems that we're facing today in setting public policy? And describe the current situation and what your solutions would be.
I mean, there's a lot of problems, as you know, Wayne, but the one that I think is really at the bottom of all of them is integrity, accountability, transparency, and we've lost that. We don't expect it from our leaders. We don't expect it from our government officials. So basically, these government workers have forgotten who they report to. They've forgotten who pays their wages. And we need to affect legislation, I think, to make them accountable to the people, right from the top. So, I mean, obviously, it's very difficult to recall an elected official, right? It's way harder to recall them than to vote them in the first place. So all of these things, I think, work hand in hand. We have to give the public more power to say, no, you are not doing what I voted you in to do. So now I'm going to recall you, or I'm going to penalize you in some way. And honestly, then you get into the second problem where they are giving themselves raises every year. No, that should be tied to the CPI or to inflation, or however you want to do it. But if you're doing a lousy job and people can't afford to live in the province, then you should not get a raise or a bonus. That's just how, that's how private business works. And I think that's how the public should operate as well.
I totally agree with what you said, Alexandra, and that the key point, again, is the lack of accountability. I would even go so far as to say that the legislators should be taking a cut in pay to reflect the fact that the electorate has taken a huge cut in their incomes. And you raised the point of making it easier to recall the elected officials. I think that's a marvelous idea. When I talked with people who were at the hub of the independent movement, they had advanced that concept. The other thing too is to liberate the FOIA. So what I'm saying is open up the freedom of information so that the electorate can see what's actually going on. There is a very clear effort on the part of the elected officials and the entrenched bureaucrats to hide that information. Public business should be public, and it's not at this point, and everything should be exposed. And once these things are exposed to daylight and fresh air, then I think we're going to be able to go ahead and fix things, and it's going to be apparent to the electorate. And I think too, they'll be more inclined to participate.
So Roger, your point there regarding freedom of information and protection of privacy sort of leads right into the next question, and it's what would your first actions be going into the legislature, and why would you take those actions? And so let's go to Alexandra, because I like ladies first.
I mean, there's so many first day things I would have liked to do, but I'll tell you what I told John Rustad when he was sitting on my balcony, stabbing me in the back. that I wanted to be the one to fire Dr. Bonnie Henry and basically start that criminal investigation into what happened surrounding COVID, because I think that the public needs to know who was paid what those Pfizer contracts look like, all of the manipulations. As we know, the government was funding advertisements to manipulate people into obtaining vaccines. You know, they were creating social media accounts to bully people who weren't getting vaccinated or who weren't buying into all of the fear that was surrounding this, flu season. So, that was my kind of thing, is that we have to accountability. And the first order of business, I think, for accountability is to look at COVID, because millions of people lost their livelihoods. They became depressed. They became addicted to drugs. There was so much fallout over this, and government has not addressed their part in this, and how their cure was worse than the disease for most people in this province. So that's where I would have started.
Roger?
To add to what you just said, Alexandra, I think it would be terrific to expose the findings of the NCI, the National Citizens Inquiry. I think that would be instrumental in forwarding the very things that you said. Consistent with what we found on the street, my first action would be to remove the carbon tax right out of the gate. And then repeal Bill 36 and go back to the original Health Professions Act, perhaps on a temporary basis, because even that act required some work. In doing that, I think you need to burn all of the licensing bodies to the ground. They are thoroughly corrupt. People need to review what's gone on with Charles Hoff, Dr. Charles Hoff, who has been crucified by the College of Physicians and Surgeons. A more public example of that, of course, is the persecution of, help me out here, Jordan Peterson by the Ontario. Okay, that's exemplary of what's gone on by bodies. And then rebuild those licensing bodies from the ground up and purge them of the corrupt people who are in there. That's going to be really tough, but it's essential in terms of restoring our healthcare.
So another question, and it's similar to what we've been talking about for the last few moments, is what two motions will you ask all 93 members of the legislature to support, and why?
Well, again, consistent with what we found on the street survey, it would be doing things to improve the cost of living and that sort of thing. So the first thing is that carbon tax has simply got to go. And then again, as I said, it's repeal 36, which is the Health Professions and Occupancy or Occupations Act. And then I think it's essential to go after the corrupt people like Bonnie Henry and make sure that her replacement is not Dina Henshaw, who has quietly been moved over from Alberta. And you don't hear a word of it. And I'm going, yeah, they're gonna fire Bonnie, and then Dina's going to be her replacement. Should we take some bets on that? I'll put $10 on the table. No. or fine whiskey. But all kidding aside, I think that's what we're gonna see with this existing government, and so we need to act against those things.
Sure. I mean, Rogers, they were all great. I second him on the carbon tax for sure. And who knows what other taxes we need to kind of look at and then start repealing, because as we know, businesses are just being hammered in this province with these ridiculous, onerous burdens and, ridiculous legislation that we have to start peeling back. The other thing I think is really important, we need an independent ethics commission and an ethics commissioner who can start looking at all of this corruption and where the missing funds have gone. Because as we know, there are so many sweetheart deals being made by our current government with various contractors, and we need to open those books and have a look and see, you know, who's been paid off and who's been paid too much, and make sure that from now on people have full transparency into their government dealings and where their taxpayer money is going.
Can I add one thing?
Yep.
Perhaps we should get a local citizen group to review the pay of all of the MLAs and reset a pay scale if that's indicated. And perhaps, as you suggested, Alexandra, only tie it to the consumer price index, but added to that, if people's apparent pays are dropped, then maybe we should be looking at having the MLAs take a cut, or recall them and fire them.
Or maybe we can actually pay them according to some kind of, you know, rating that their constituents give them.
What private members' bills would you propose, and how will you gain support for those bills in the legislature? And, you know, how will you make sure that they actually get the number of votes that are needed to pass?
Let's talk about MLA's wages. Maybe we should introduce a private members bill based on accountability and you know, what you've done for your constituents. How would you get people to vote with you on that one? I mean, hopefully they will do the right thing based on what is going on in this province with affordability and their constituents not being able to eat, you know, or drive their vehicles. And I think if not, then hopefully they'll be publicly shamed by their constituents emailing them and saying, why shouldn't you take a pay cut, or why shouldn't your income be frozen until such time as our province is actually, you know, doing well. As we know, our credit rating is in the toilet right now, thanks to our current government. So it's time for everybody to take some austere measures, and it's not fair to expect the citizens of this province to do it all while the MLAs sit back with their $160,000 every year in admin stuff and their $25,000 living away allowance and their $120,000 paycheck, plus their $40,000 cabinet position pay. You know, I mean, at some point we have to make politicians' jobs about service to the community and not about feeding at the trough.
In about 2018, I sat on a committee here to review our counselors' pay.
How'd that go?
Well, not as well as I hoped. My proposal was that the counselors' pay would be tied to the median household incomes and median individual incomes that are reported by Statistics Canada in their quintennial censuses. Well, that got shot down. And of course, all the counselors are now getting raises according to the cost of inflation and all the rest of that other stuff. But if we made it so that their pay was tied to the economics of the economy that they actually create and work in, I thought that would be more incentive for them to do a better job in making sure that we had an economy that actually works. Roger, what would be your first or second private member's bill? And how are you going to get support for it?
I think that we need to rejuvenate the political process. And I think that's going to occur by virtue of the independents stymieing what the parties are doing. And that stymie is going to come primarily from exposing what's going on. It's going to be a while before we can end party politics as it is, but I think the exposure of those activities, and again, that's through the freedom of information access, I think then the constituents are going to get to have a good view of what has gone on and what's going on. And so we're going to maybe expose Bonnie Henry. You know, let's hold her up and get her fired, and then initiate the criminal, I think it's a criminal process of chasing her down and exposing what actually happened, as you suggested earlier, Alexandra. But clearly, that whole scenario is what led us to see what was going on. I think those processes were already proceeding over the last 10 years, but certainly COVID just accelerated the entire process. So now we've got to get into the business of reversing what's going on.
Okay, if there's one especially relevant, memorable, and compelling message that you can send to your constituents, what is it?
Get out and vote. Do your homework. Look at each candidate very closely with your magnifying glass. Ask the questions. Have they ever run a successful business? Are they invested in their community? Have they ever been caught lying about their credentials on the internet? You know, all of these things that point to their integrity and their ethics. You know, call them up, email them, ask them the hard questions, and don't assume that they're going to act on your behalf once they get to the Legislative Assembly. Make sure that they understand what is important to you. Make sure that they understand that you are going to hold them accountable, you know, and tell them like you are going to be a pain in their side every single day if they aren't acting in the best interests of the community, because they have to hear this from many people. Right now, they confused a lot of these candidates thinking that they have to pledge allegiance to their party, but they have to remember who is actually paying the bill at the end of the day, and that's you and me and Roger. You know, it's our taxes that pay their wages, and they seem to have forgotten that. They seem to think that ethics are, you know, wiggly. It's time to understand that doing the right thing is always doing the right thing. It's black and white. It's not gray. It's not, oh, well, I can't speak up today because I might get in trouble with my leader, which is why I got fired. You know, but it's sometimes you have to be accountable and true to yourself, because at the end of the day, you have to sleep every night knowing that you are a good person. And right now, I think voters don't have that faith that their candidates are good people. And I think that they have to really start doing their homework and voting for the person who resonates most deeply with them. And if they don't have one, maybe they should run.
I think the biggest thing is going to be exposing the existing corruption to the light of day, to open air. We did similar things in dentistry. When there was an infection, you would open and drain that situation, and then it went on to heal. And we're going to have to look at a healing of our society and of our political system. Alexandra, as you pointed out, the constituents should be encouraged to vote with their hearts and to avoid the strategic voting and that sort of thing, because if we don't exercise our democracy in the fashion of voting with our hearts and voting on an ideal situation, then what we're looking at is going to continue to perpetuate. And that part of it has to end. We need to stymie the party system, and as individuals, as independents, we need to stand up and continue. And I say that continue to do the right thing, because in my own private practice, as much as private interests would encourage me to look at my own personal finance and hold that over my patients, I chose the opposite, which is to make sure that my patients were looked after first. Recent politics has reflected where people are looking at themselves rather than looking at their constituents. I believe that we need to stand hardcore for our constituents and keep that out in the open.
So what do you think about the merger of the BC United, former Liberal Party, British Columbia, with the BC Conservatives that was announced last week?
Well, I have thoughts, obviously. So basically, it was a concern, you know, several months ago, obviously, to a lot of us who were the original BC Conservative candidates, because as we saw, the party kept on bringing over BC United candidates. They kept on bringing over BC United executive and that kind of stuff, you know, campaign managers. And that was a concern to me at the time, because to me, if you are rat bagging on the Conservatives and calling them conspiracy theorists one day, and then you join forces the next day, then you really are showing everybody that this is just about a paycheck and it has nothing to do with values at all. So obviously that was a concern a few months ago, and it has gotten increasingly more obvious, to the point that a lot of people have used the word infiltration to me when we've been discussing this issue. And I do think it is infiltration at this point. And the counterpoint, you know, is that you have to be a more moderate party in order to get the majority of the voter base. Unfortunately, once we become the majority party, we seem to be really diluting the messages that attracted this grassroots phenomenon and made the party so successful at the time. So they played a dangerous game, and I honestly think that it's backfiring horrendously now that we've seen the lack of loyalty that they've had to a lot of their candidates. The people who really worked hard to build the party up are now getting ousted in favor of Liberals. And I mean, prime point, I was replaced by a person who ran for the Liberal leadership a couple of years ago. And, you know, you can go and watch the video of him saying, yes, I will definitely be representing the Liberals in the next provincial election. You know, this is my party. So again, I mean, where is the integrity? Where is the accountability? You know, and really it's concerning, because all it looks like to me is this is the ultimate rebrand of BC United, quite frankly. And a lot of people have told me, you know, I'm very cynical for that. But I mean, there was a plan, and who knows when it started, but here's where we ended up.
I think about 2.5 years ago, the BCU, or the Liberals at the time, showed their true colors. And basically they're lost. So at that convention, they went and tried to rebrand themselves as the BCU. I called them the BCD, for disunited. And they were supposed to be the official opposition in the House. Well, the fact of the matter is, I think the numbers of times that they actually voted with the NDP is, I mean, that number is just off the chart. So where was our opposition ever? So now we fast forward into last week's debacle, and again, it's a flagrant attempt to rebrand themselves. I think that they probably showed up with more resources financially and maybe some support over the Conservatives. And I don't mean popularity-wise, but the infrastructure was there. And now I think they've stepped in. They're rebranding themselves again. And in the process of doing that, the Conservatives, who initially started fairly far right and brought in the very people, Alexandra, that you noted, the people who were freedom oriented, who were opposed to the mandates and all the medical horribleness that they're involved in. And so here we are, they've infiltrated, they're going to replace people by coronation rather than through an electoral process. I mean, there isn't time to do what a riding association was supposed to do. They've parachuted unknowns into various places. You got replaced. And so here we are. I think the true blue, real Conservatives are going to consider stepping out and becoming independents. The BCU people who get displaced, they may run as independents, and so that's going to pollute the independent movement to a certain extent. It will behoove to the electorate to be able to sift through all of this. I mean, it is a real S show, you know, and I mean, it's going to be exciting. We've got 6 weeks. And it's going to be positively exciting, and it's going to fall to us to step up and show what great people we can be.
Well, that concludes all the questions, and I guess we'll save the best for last. I'll go first, then Roger, then Alexandra. But one of the taglines that we've been using here, and to say thank you to both of you for having the courage to step forward into the roles that you did, is, we have to get people involved, keep them involved, and stay involved ourselves as well, if we're ever going to really right the course of this ship. So the get involved, stay involved, or pardon me, get involved, get others involved, and keep involved has got to be something that becomes a bit of a mission for us. And, again, thanks so much to both of you. I've run for office myself, and I know the feelings that you're having at times. And so that's my concluding remarks, and thanks. Roger?
I'm just excited to be doing this, and it has been a wild roller coaster. I mean, again, the last week has just been, it's been a real show. It's exciting, and I think it's going to reveal who the real winners are. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, guys. And even though I'm not running this round, I'm watching very interestedly, and I throw my support behind all of the independents who are trying to make a difference and show people that there's a better way. And I truly believe at some point there will be an awakening where people understand that, a dog can't have two masters. These MLAs cannot be loyal to their party and to their voters. And if they have to pick a side, they better choose wisely. So good luck, Roger. I'm rooting for you. And I really hope that the next 6 weeks show people that there's a better way to do this.